Good afternoon. Welcome to the Analyst. Today we'll be taking up 7 newspaper articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express and discussing them. The handout for the same will be available in the description of this video for your kind perusal. Please have a look at that. The first article that we'll take up is related to the revitalization of the special economic zones in India, as a government panel will work on establishing new SEZ norms to boost manufacturing and to help exporters in leveraging domestic market at a time when the US is imposing steep tariffs on exports from India. The second article is related to anti-defection law, as a tribunal headed by the speaker will hear the anti-defection petitions against the 4 BRS MLAs who defected to Congress. Additionally, we'll take up 5 articles in the simplified section which will be helpful for your prelims and mains preparation. The first article is related to the revival of special economic zones in India, as multiple SEZ units have been struggling, especially the ones which export to the US market, which cater entirely to the US market, because US has been imposing steep tariffs upon exports from India. Therefore, a government panel is now working to establish new SEZ norms so that they can leverage the domestic market also to boost manufacturing. Therefore, we'll discuss the status of the special economic zones in India, their performance evaluation, the challenges that the SEZs in India face, the international best practices regarding the establishment and functioning of SEZs which can be replicated in India also, the government initiatives that have been taken up so far, and a few suggestions in this regard. This is important in GS3 under the topic Indian economy and issues related to planning, mobilization of resources, growth, development and employment. First, what are SEZs, the special economic zones? They are essentially duty-free enclaves. They are treated as if it is a foreign territory for the purposes of trade, imposition of tariffs or their operations, etc. Because the output from the SEZ units, that is for the export purposes. Whatever goods they produce or the services they provide, it is for the export purpose, not for domestic sales or domestic consumption. Therefore, no import duties are levied upon the SEZ units for any goods they import for their operations or maintenance, etc., because their output is essentially exported. The SEZs in India, they were established from 2000 onwards by the replacement of the earlier export processing zones. And the SEZs, they are regulated through the 2005 Act, the SEZ Act 2005 and the SEZ Rules 2006. The special economic zones, they can be of several types. For example, free trade zones, export processing zones, industrial estates, etc. And they can be set up by the public sector also, by the private sector also, or through a joint venture by the state governments also. Now let us look at the status of the SEZs in India. The number of operational SEZs in India has been increasing continuously ever since their establishment. The term operational SEZs means that a SEZ becomes operational when the first SEZ unit in it starts production, when it starts giving output of the goods that it intends to produce or the services that it intends to provide. As per the latest data from the SEZ India website, the number of SEZs that have been accorded formal approval in India is 419, and the number of notified SEZs in India is 370, and the number of operational SEZs in India is 276. This gap between the number of formal approvals and the number of notified SEZs, that shows the regulatory delays, and the gap between the number of notified SEZs to the operational SEZs, that shows the implementation delays. Now let's look at the distribution of SEZs in India. First, the regional distribution, the state-wise. Most of the SEZs in India, they are established in the coastal states. For example, Tamil Nadu, Telangana, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Gujarat, Kerala, etc. Because it is easier to export from the coastal states because of the easier access to the ports and the maritime shipping routes. Now let's look at the distribution of the SEZs sector-wise. Most of the SEZs, they are working in the IT sector, the IT services, electronics, hardware, semiconductors, etc. Whereas the share of the SEZ units which are engaged in the manufacturing part, that is lesser in number. When we look at their contribution of exports from India, because that was the initial essential purpose for the establishment of the special economic zones, their share in the exports from India has also increased from 2006 onwards. Essentially, before the coming into effect of the SEZ Act 2005, the contribution was just about 6% in India's exports. Now it has grown continuously to around 38% share in India's exports in fiscal year 2024. Now, before coming to the performance evaluation of the SEZs in India, let us look at the evolution of the establishment of the special economic zones in India. The initial phase was from 1965 onwards, when there was the establishment of the Kandla Free Trade Zone in Gujarat and the Santa Cruz Electronics Export Processing Zone in Mumbai. At that time, the objectives of the establishment of the export processing zones were not clear. The policies were also not clear. They were rigid, and the efficient infrastructure was also not present, and the incentives package was also not very attractive. But from 1981 onwards, we started expanding the export processing zones. 5 more export processing zones were set up in Noida, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, West Bengal, Andhra Pradesh, etc. And there was also the introduction of the export-oriented unit scheme to incentivize the exports. Then there was the consolidation phase from 91 onwards till 99. When the export processing zones, they went through administrative restructuring, procedural simplification, delegation of powers, rationalization of the customs procedures for their ease of doing business. And the subsequent expansionary phase started from 2000 onwards. Essentially, after the foreign trade policy 2000, the export import policy 2000 was adopted for the establishment of both the public sector, the private sector, and the joint public-private special economic zones. The earlier free trade zones, for example, the Kandla Free Trade Zone, the Santa Cruz Electronics Export Processing Zone, they were converted into the special economic zones, and the enactment of the SEZ Act 2005 took place. And the subsequent growth phase happened from 2007 onwards, which witnessed significant growth in the number of formal approvals, notifications, and the functioning special economic zones. Although there was a subsequent period of denotifications also of the SEZs by the developers because of the economic meltdown during the 2012-13 and the poor market response as well. Now let us evaluate the performance of the special economic zones in India, whether they have achieved their intended objectives. First, let us look at the bright side, how they have achieved their objectives. One of the foremost objectives of the establishment of SEZs in India was export promotion, export generation and diversification of exports from India, which they have achieved reasonably. For example, the share in the exports from the SEZ units as a percentage of the total exports from India has increased. As we have observed that in fiscal year 2006, it was just about 6%. Now it has increased to about 38% as of fiscal year 2024. Out of this 38%, also about 50% of the exports comes from 3 sectors essentially, including pharmaceuticals, chemicals, and electronic products. When we look at the penetration of the exports, it has not been increased as much, as about 50% of the export from the SEZ units happens to 4 countries, that is USA, China, UAE, and Malaysia. Similar is the situation of the total exports from India also. And the value addition in the special economic zones is higher, as the number of complex products which are produced in the SEZ units is higher as compared to the percentage number of complex products which are produced in the domestic tariff area. When we look at another objective of the establishment of the SEZs, that is bringing in FDI into India or investment promotion, it has been achieved, as the FDIs in the special economic zones have increased 4 times from fiscal year 2006 to fiscal year 2020 itself. When we look at employment generation, another intended objective of the establishment of the SEZs, it has led to the employment generation for about 3.2 million people as per the latest data from the SEZ India website. And also the labor productivity in the special economic zones is higher as compared to the national labor productivity in India. It is about 1.5 times the national labor productivity. And the employment of women in the SEZs is higher as a percentage. The employment ratio of women in the SEZs is 31% as compared to the national ratio, which is around 20% only. Now let us also look at some success stories regarding the special economic zones in India, how they have achieved the other objectives. For example, technology transfer to India, establishment of high-tech industries in India, the production of active pharmaceutical ingredients in India, backward area development, labor reforms and other initiatives. For example, the first case study is related to the Tata Boeing Aerospace Limited, the establishment of the SEZ unit in the SEZ in India. This was the first equity venture of Boeing in India. Through the joint venture between Tata and Boeing, they were producing the Boeing aerostructures for the Boeing Apache helicopter in India. This led to the technology transfer also and the establishment of high-tech industries and the industrial production in India. Similarly, the Brandix India Apparel City, the SEZ unit in the Brandix India Apparel SEZ, this also led to the generation of employment for women. This houses almost the entire value chain for the textiles, and 75% of the employees here are women. More than 15,000 women are employed. Therefore, it achieved the purposes of the labor reforms and also the backward area development. Specifically, a case study can be quoted for the backward area development, that is the establishment of Aqueous SEZ near Belgaum. That establishment of the SEZ unit led to the conversion of a dryland area of the barren land into an industrial hub for the production of the aerospace equipments, for the automotive components and also the IT and IT enabled services, etc., therefore leading to backward area development. As per the IMF report as well, the establishment of special economic zones has led to a positive spillover effect in the backward areas. For example, increase in the incomes, increase in the standard of life, quality of life, etc. Similarly, another case study is that of the establishment of IFSC, the gift city in Gujarat, that is providing one of its kind financial services. The overseas financial institutions that were operating from the other bases, the overseas bases, they can also operate from within India through the gift city, providing such financial services. Now let's also look at some case studies which are prominently quoted regarding the success of the special economic zones. That is the case study of China and Korea. China went for the establishment of the special economic zones and they used them as the test beds for the testing of the policies that they wanted to implement. They came up with innovative methods to attract the FDI in China, and they expanded the scope of FDI to include the infrastructure also. What did it lead to? It led to the technology spillover, the increase in the national productivity in China, the establishment of industrial clusters in China. And what was its effect in numbers? The SEZs in China, they accounted for 50% of the FDI into China, and they were accounting for 44% of the exports from China, but they were going for targeted establishment of the SEZs. For example, establishing them near the ports so that the logistics becomes easier for the export purposes, and they also were creating employment, about 6% of the employment coming from the SEZs in China in 2012. Another case study is that of Korea. There the government shifted from import substitution to export promotion. They went for the development of the heavy industries and the chemical industry development, especially as they wanted to overcome the constraint in the domestic demand, as the domestic demand was not enough to fuel the economic growth there. Therefore, the establishment of special economic zones in Korea that led to the structural transformation within the economy in Korea. What did it lead to? It led to the SEZs accounting for 28% of the FDI coming into Korea and 11% of their exports in 2007 itself, and also employment generation. Now let's look at the challenges that the SEZ units in India face. One of the challenges is faced by the MSME units in the SEZs. The MSME units, they get negligible tax benefits in the SEZs. They get tax benefits on the investments. But the MSMEs otherwise established in India, they also get a lot of benefits. For example, tax benefits on their profits, the benefits of various schemes specifically implemented for the MSMEs in India. Therefore, the comparative advantage for the MSMEs in the SEZ units gets negligible. Similarly, the utilization of the non-processing area in the special economic zones is not effective. For example, housing cannot be established there otherwise. It can be established for the SEZ units only in the SEZ areas. There is the implication of the free trade agreements also. When the free trade agreement is signed, then the duties which are imposed upon the import from a certain country, they are reduced or they are brought down to zero. And the SEZ units, they are essentially functioning because of their relative advantage of having to pay zero duty upon their import of the raw materials, because the products that they are producing, the goods or services, they are meant for the export purposes. Through the signing of the FTA, their relative advantage gets diminished. Similarly, the WTO rules are not complied with for the SEZ units because the import duties are not imposed. They get export advantages also. Therefore, the countries to which the products, the goods and services are exported from the SEZ units, they start imposing the countervailing duties to offset their relative advantage. Also, they get limited access to the domestic market as well, because if they want to sell their products, goods or services to the domestic market, they will have to pay the duties they otherwise are not required to pay for their import of raw materials, etc. And also they will have to compete with the domestic firms, and the domestic firms on the other hand enjoy the advantage of the PLI scheme, also the production linked incentive scheme. Similarly, there is an underutilization of the SEZs in general. There are vacant SEZs also, as we observe that there is a difference in the number of notified SEZs and the operational SEZs. So we need to increase the utilization of the SEZ areas. Similarly, there are environmental and sustainability concerns also. Because of the rapid industrialization in the special economic zones, it leads to pollution and environmental damage as well. Additionally, there are a few operational challenges as well that are faced by the SEZ units. It has been observed by the PCCI, the PhD Chamber of Commerce and Industry in India, that they face instability in the policy environment. They face regulatory hurdles, for example, delays in the clearances. They face a lack of tax incentives also of recent times, and a global slowdown. Therefore, the decreasing exports is also a problem for the SEZs in India. Now let's look at the government initiatives taken up so far for the promotion of special economic zones in India. First, there is an exemption of the IGST and the central GST for the SEZ developers. Also, there is an income tax exemption, 100% income tax exemption on the export income of the SEZ units. 100% for the initial 5 years of their operation under the section 10AA of the Income Tax Act. For the subsequent 5 years of their operation, there is 50% income tax exemption on the export income of the SEZ units. Also, they get duty-free imports as well as the domestic procurement of any goods needed for their operations and maintenance. The minimum land area criteria has also been relaxed. For the sector-specific SEZs, it has been relaxed by 50%, and for the semiconductor and electronics manufacturing, the minimum land that is required has been relaxed recently from 50 hectare to just 10 hectare. Also, they are allowed domestic sales as well for the semiconductor and electronics manufacturing sector after paying the duties. Additionally, there is the provision of single window clearance also to give them speedy clearances. Now, what suggestions can we give for the SEZ reforms in India? First, there has to be an administrative streamlining further so that there is no regulatory delay, and their relative advantages have to be retained. For example, we can go for workforce skilling, we can go for more tax incentives, fiscal incentives, etc. And we can emulate the success stories from the other countries as well, which we will look at. And we need to put in place a stable, transparent SEZ policy framework. Additionally, the Baba Kalyani Committee had recommended that we need to look at the special economic zones as the 3 E's, that they should be looked at as the employment and economic enclaves, rather than focusing upon the export-oriented hubs, export-oriented zones. They should be viewed as employment and economic growth hubs. Additionally, we need to de-link them from their NFE performance, that is net foreign exchange earnings performance. We need to de-link it from that. Rather, the incentives should be based upon the employment generation, employment for women, investment, etc., rather than their net foreign exchange earnings. Also, we can have separate framework for manufacturing SEZs and the service related SEZs, so that we can have sector specific frameworks. We can put in place an integrated online portal for facilitating their entry, operations as well as exit. the exit of the SEZ units from the SEZ areas. We also need to put in place a high quality infrastructure, for example, high speed rail, expressways, ports, logistics, warehouses, airports, walk to work zones, etc. We can also replicate some of the international best practices as well. For example, having a well-defined institutional structure, as we have seen in the Aqaba Special Economic Zone in Jordan, which is governed by two authorities, the Aqaba SEZ Authority and the Aqaba Development Corporation. There are clearly defined roles, plus there is financial autonomy as well as the regulatory autonomy. Similarly, the Incheon Free Zone, that is a one-stop shop for the investor consultation. The advice is provided for the investors there for the investment promotion, and therefore there is a well-defined institutional structure. Similarly, we can promote the anchor investors so that there is an ecosystem development and there is incentivization of the establishment of industries of the high-tech sectors. For example, the Dubai Internet City, that provides concessions on the lease rates, etc. And the Shenzhen Special Economic Zone provides incentives for the establishment of high-tech industries, even the equity market, etc. And there should be a proximity and the connectivity of the SEZ units to the major markets and the gateways. For example, Incheon Free Zone, which has an on-site port as well as on-site airport, and it is proximate to the capital also. Similarly, the establishment of Dubai Logistics Corridor. The business environment should be friendly. For example, the Jebel Ali Free Zone area in the UAE, there is 100% currency conversion is allowed, 100% foreign talent is allowed, there is no restriction upon the employment of the foreign nationals, there are no restrictions upon the ownership also, 100% foreign ownership is also allowed for the SEZ units in the UAE Free Zone. The high value services should be focused upon. For example, the establishment of recreation center and sports complex, as we see in the Dubai Airport Free Zone, the establishment of data center, for example, Dubai International Financial Center, the high value services. The establishment of joint SEZs can also be explored. For example, joint SEZ development for addressing both the capital constraint as well as the knowledge constraint, as is done by China Singapore Suzhou Industrial Park, where the people trained in Singapore, they are sent to work there, and there is harmony in the establishment as well as the operations, so that the institutional structure is also in harmony and there is cooperation as well. Additionally, there is a mains practice question also. Special economic zones were envisioned as engines of growth, export promotion and employment generation. Evaluating their performance, discuss the major challenges faced by the SEZs in India, suggest measures to enhance their effectiveness in promoting exports and industrial growth. Please try to write it. The next article is related to the anti-defection law. The context behind it is that the Speaker of Telangana will be hearing the anti-defection petitions against the 4 Bharat Rashtra Smiti MLAs who defected to Congress. So we will discuss the constitutional provisions related to anti-defection law in India, which is contained in the 10th schedule to the Indian Constitution. We'll also have a look at the issues related to anti-defection law, the judicial observations in this regard, and a few suggestions as well. This is important in GS2 under the topic Indian Constitution, Features, Amendments and Significant Provisions. So what is anti-defection law? It is contained in the 10th schedule to the Indian Constitution, which was inserted through the 52nd Constitutional Amendment Act because of the incidents like Ayaram's Gayalal's. Gayalal was an MLA, a member of the Legislative Assembly in Haryana, who switched political parties 3 times within a fortnight. So to prevent the members of the houses, to prevent the legislators from switching political parties frequently, to prevent horse trading, and to ensure that there is stability in the government formation, the anti-defection law was put in place. Therefore, the anti-defection law provided that defection itself can be a ground for the disqualification of the legislator. So what are the grounds for disqualification, conditions for disqualification under the anti-defection law? First, if a member of a house voluntarily gives up the membership of his political party, if an MP or MLA resigns, voluntarily gives up the membership of his political party, then they can be disqualified. Or if they are not voting as per the guidelines of their political party, they are not voting as per the directions of the whip of their political party, then also they can be disqualified. Or they are abstaining from voting as per the directions of the political party, they are supposed to vote, but they are abstaining from voting, then also they can be disqualified. But if a member has already gotten prior permission from the political party not to vote as per the directions of the party, then they won't be disqualified. Or even after voting against the directions of the political party, if their action is forgiven, if their action is condoned by the political party within 15 days from such voting or abstention from voting, then also they won't be disqualified. Also, if an independent member of the house, an independent legislator, MP or MLA, joins a political party after the election, he has been elected independently, not from the ticket of a political party, but he joins a political party after their election, then they are liable for disqualification. Also, if a nominated member joins a political party 6 months after their nomination, after their membership of the legislature, then also they are liable for disqualification under the anti-defection law. Who has the power to disqualify? Who decides the anti-defection law petitions? It is decided by the Speaker, the presiding officer of the House. And if the anti-defection petition is against the Speaker himself, the complaint is against the Speaker himself, then the petition will be decided by a member of the House who has been elected by the House itself for this purpose. But there are certain exceptions where the disqualification will not happen under the anti-defection law. For example, a member will not be disqualified if his party itself merges with another party. Then he will not be disqualified whether he becomes a member of the new party or he chooses not to accept the merger and opts to function as a separate group. Now this will be dealt with as a merger. This will be treated as a merger only if 2/3 of the members of the party have agreed to the merger. Another exception created is for the Speaker. If the Speaker, after becoming the Speaker, resigns from his political party, then also he will not be disqualified under the anti-defection law. That is to ensure the impartial functioning, non-partisan functioning of the Speaker. Or if the Speaker, after he is no longer the Speaker, rejoins his political party, then also he will not be liable for disqualification under the anti-defection law. Now subsequently, there was a further amendment through the 91st Constitutional Amendment Act, which provided that the defection by 1/3 will not be treated as a merger. Earlier, it was provided that the defection by 1/3 of the members of a political party, the split, there also the disqualification will not be attracted. But after the 91st Constitutional Amendment Act, there will be no exemption for a split by 1/3 members of a political party. There has to be a merger by 2/3 only. And the size of the Council of Ministers was also fixed through the 91st Constitutional Amendment Act. For example, the Article 75 Clause 1A provides that the maximum size for the Council of Ministers for the Union Cabinet can be up to 15% of the total members of the House. And Article 164 Clause 1A similarly provides the criteria for the Council of Ministers at the state level, that there have to be minimum 12 ministers in the Council of Ministers for the state level and maximum up to 15% of the strength of the House. But for the smaller states, the minimum number of ministers is fixed to be just at 7. Also, if a person has been disqualified under the anti-defection law, then there won't be any appointment to the Council of Ministers until they have been elected again. But there are certain issues with the 10th schedule to the Indian Constitution, issues with the anti-defection law in India. For example, it places too much emphasis upon the stability of the government. It ensures that a person, if once elected from one political party, they will not be able to resign from their political party or join another political party and remain as a member of the House. They will be disqualified immediately. But it is not placing emphasis upon the accountability. The members of the House, they should also have their individual freedom of conscience. They are accountable ultimately to the electorate. They represent the collective will of the electorate who have elected them. Ultimately, emphasis is more upon the stability rather than their accountability. And also, the separation of powers is affected as there is too much concentration of power in the cabinet itself. The decision making part is done through the Council of Ministers, the cabinet, and the separation of powers between the legislature and executive is affected. Similarly, there is no time limit also for the decision making. The speaker, the presiding officer of the house, has to determine the anti-defection petitions, but there are no time limits prescribed within which the speaker has to take the decision. Usually if the MP or the MLA who has defected from the opposition party and joined the ruling party, then the speakers, they keep on sitting on the anti-defection petitions, not taking a decision at all for months together. And also there is an inherent bias of the speaker which is observed, that the speaker usually functions in a biased manner if the opposition party MP or MLA has joined the ruling party, because the speaker usually himself belongs to the ruling party, therefore he delays the decision making in such cases. Whereas if the ruling party MP or MLA resigns from the ruling party and joins the opposition, then he or she is disqualified immediately, then the decision making in the anti-defection petitions is immediate. Similarly, the incumbent has a head start in the by-elections. For example, if a person has defected, has resigned from his political party and joined a new political party, he already knows that he is going to take this action, and he has already known the consequences as well, that he will be disqualified. Therefore, in the background, he has already started campaigning also. He has a head start in the by-elections as well. Now, the anti-defection law petitions are decided not only in India on similar provisions, but the anti-defection law provisions are there in several other countries also. For example, Namibia, Nepal, Nigeria, Seychelles, Sierra Leone, Singapore, etc. as well. Now, what are the judicial observations in this regard? First, the Supreme Court in the Kyoto Holohan case observed that the anti-defection law provisions, they do not amount to the curtailment of the freedom of speech of the legislators. There is no curtailment of the Article 19, Clause 1, Clause A, the freedom of speech and expression, or the democratic rights of the MPs are not curtailed. They are free to say anything on the floor of the House, and they are having such privilege, and the voting as per the directions of the party will not amount to the curtailment of their freedom of expression. Also, the court there observed that the para 7 of the anti-defection law enacted at that time, barring the jurisdiction of the courts in this regard, will need the ratification of the states as well, as it will affect the position of the courts. And the decision of the speaker and the chairman, as the case may be, will be final regarding the anti-defection law petitions, but the decision of the speaker will be subject to judicial review also as per the Kyoto Holohan judgment. In Dr. Kashinath versus Speaker Goa Legislative Assembly case, the court observed that the speaker, once he takes the decision in the anti-defection petition, cannot change it. The speaker cannot review his own decision. There is no such constitutional provision. In G. Vishwanathan versus the Speaker Tamil Nadu Legislative Assembly case, the court observed that once a person has been expelled from his party, he is unattached from his political party, but for the purposes of the anti-defection law, for the purposes of the proceedings under the 10th schedule to the Indian Constitution, he is to be treated as a member of the old party only. If he is taking actions against the directions of the old party, still he can be disqualified as per the anti-defection law provisions. In Ravi Naik versus Union of India case, the court observed that the procedural irregularity regarding the decision making of the anti-defection law petitions is immune to judicial review. Rather, we have to give a broader meaning to the terms like voluntarily giving up membership. It has to be judged based upon the conduct of the legislator. A written resignation, an oral resignation may not be required. The conduct itself may be sufficient to deduce that the person has voluntarily given up the membership of his political party. In Rajendra Singh Rana versus Swami Prasad Maurya case, the court observed that the speaker ignoring the anti-defection petitions for disqualification, that amounts to the violation of his constitutional duty. If he is sitting on it and not taking decision, he is not performing his constitutional duty. And the giving of a letter by a legislator to another party to form government, that amounts to voluntarily giving up. Even if the legislator has not given a resignation letter to his political party, but if he gives a letter to another political party for the formation of the government, that amounts to voluntarily giving up membership and therefore will attract disqualification under the anti-defection law. In Kesham Meghachandra Singh versus Honorable Speaker Manipur Legislative Assembly, the court observed that there has to be a reasonable period within which the anti-defection law petitions have to be decided. The speaker cannot sit on it forever, and it has to be determined based upon the facts of the case. And usually there can be a provision that it has to be decided within 3 months unless exceptional circumstances exist which warrant the delay on the part of the speaker. In recent Bharat Rashtra Samiti case, the court observed that indecision on part of the speaker defeats the very objective of the 10th schedule. Therefore, the decision making has to be quick. Now, what are the suggestions that we can give for the anti-defection law in India? The Dinesh Goswami committee observed that the decision making for the anti-defection petitions should not be in the hands of the speaker, where there are chances of bias also. Rather, it can be in the hands of the president for the disqualification of the members of the parliament, or the governor for the disqualification of the members of the legislative assemblies, as the case may be, and that decision by the president or governor should be taken on the advice of the election commission. The Halim committee observed that we need to define the terms, define the term like political party itself, and then define what means by the voluntarily giving up membership of a political party. The Law Commission in the 170th report observed that the issuance of whips, they should be limited to only those cases where the government itself is in danger. If the whip is not issued, then the government may fall. And we can delete the exemption for the splits and mergers also, as per the Law Commission report. The National Commission for Reviewing the Working of the Constitution, the Venkatacharya Committee, recommended that if the votes are cast by a defector, then they should be treated as invalid votes. They should not be counted while determining whether a bill is passed or not, and they should also be barred from holding public office. Similarly, the Supreme Court also observed that we can establish a permanent tribunal for the adjudication of the anti-defection law petitions. There should be a permanent tribunal rather than it being decided by the speaker, and the tribunal may be headed by a retired Supreme Court judge or a Chief Justice of a High Court. Additionally, there is a means practice question also. The anti-defection law was enacted to promote political stability and curb opportunistic shifts in party allegiance, yet it has often been criticized for undermining legislative independence. Examine the constitutional provisions relating to the anti-defection law, discuss the major issues in its implementation, and suggest reforms to make it more effective. Please try to write it. The next article is related to the Model Code of Conduct, which the author calls as the Malleable Code of Conduct, as there are frequent violations. This is important in GS2 under the topic Elections and the Salient Features of the RPA, the Representation of People's Act. So what is MCC, the Model Code of Conduct? These are a set of guidelines, the norms prescribed for the political parties and the candidates about how they should act. And it has been evolved through the consensus between the political parties themselves, that the political parties have consented to abide by it, that they will respect it, they will abide by it in both in letter as well as spirit, and it has been implemented strictly from the 1990s onwards. And the Election Commission also revised it in 2013. When is it operational? It is operational from the date on which the election schedule is announced until the date when the results for the election are announced. So what are the salient features of the Model Code of Conduct? What does it say? First, that no party can indulge in any activity which will aggravate any existing differences or create mutual hatred or tensions between different communities, different castes, different religions. They will not aggravate the differences along the religious or linguistic lines. Similarly, when they are criticizing the other party or the other candidates, then they should refrain from criticism of the private life. Rather, the criticism, it should be based upon the public activities. The criticism of other political parties, when made, it should be confined to their policies, their programs, their past record, their work, their contribution, etc. And the criticism of other workers, they should not be based upon unverified allegations or half-truths. Similarly, there should not be any appeal to caste or communal feelings for the securing of votes. Also, the ministers, the ruling party has certain other guidelines to follow. The ministers and other authorities, they should not announce any financial grants, any freebies, any construction of roads, provision of drinking water, announcing of new projects, laying of foundation stones, announcing of new schemes which will have the effect of eventually influencing the voters to vote in favor of the ruling party. But there are a few criticisms of the Model Code of Conduct. For example, it has been ineffective in the curbing of the malpractices which are taken up by the political parties during elections, because it does not have legal enforceability. How is it enforced? How are the provisions of MCC enforced? By resorting to the corresponding provisions in the other statutes. For example, the criminal laws like IPC or the Representation of Peoples Act 1951. Similarly, it has been criticized that the Model Code of Conduct interferes with the governance, because when the Model Code of Conduct is in place, then no new schemes can be announced. Also, there is a weak response from the side of the Election Commission of India whenever the complaints are made regarding the violation of MCC and there is delayed action. There is allegation that the Election Commission does not function in an unbiased manner. Also, it does not have the power to disqualify the candidates, and it does not have the power to deregister the political parties also. Plus, the Model Code of Conduct does not restrict the grants or the disbursements done under the ongoing programs as on the date of the announcement of the elections. Therefore, what happened in Bihar is the launch of the Mukhyamantri Mahila Rozgar Yojana in Bihar in August 2025. Under this scheme, the women are eligible to receive 10,000 as grant for the self-employment and for the livelihood opportunities, and the disbursement started during the period when the Model Code of Conduct was in force and the Prime Minister transferred the grant to 75 lakh women. And the author claims that this is breaking the Model Code of Conduct in spirit, and it is influencing the voters in favor of the ruling party through the direct cash transfers, and it is being justified under the guise of an ongoing scheme. And the scheme itself, the Mukhyamantri Mahila Rozgar Yojana, was launched just a month before the announcement of the elections. Therefore, the author says that as per the recommendations of the 2013 Standing Committee on Personal Public Grievances, Law and Justice, we can make the Model Code of Conduct legally binding. However, the Election Commission is not in favor of making the Model Code of Conduct legally binding, because the elections, they have to be completed within a short span of time, probably around 45 days, whereas if the MCC becomes legally binding, there will be naturally judicial proceedings upon the complaints made regarding the violation of the MCC, and the judicial proceedings, they usually take a longer time. Therefore, the author suggests that one of the arguments which is often taken regarding the conducting of simultaneous polls for the Lok Sabha and the state legislative assemblies is that there is an impact of MCC, the Model Code of Conduct, regarding the restriction imposed upon the government for the implementation of new programs or new schemes which affects the governance. The author suggests that we can scrap this provision in the MCC itself, that we can allow the government, the ruling party, to come up with new programs, new schemes during the time when the Model Code of Conduct is in force. That will result in one argument less in favor of the one nation, one election. That is a radical suggestion. The other suggestions that we can give regarding the Model Code of Conduct and its enforcement is, we can follow the recommendation of Law Commission, which recommended in 2015 that we can ban on advertisements for up to 6 months. We can also push for more independence for the Election Commission of India, and we can utilize the technology also. For example, utilizing artificial intelligence to prevent violations, to detect violations of the Model Code of Conduct through the social media platforms as well. The next article is related to the artificial intelligence governance norms by the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. This is important in GS3 under the topic Science and Technology, Developments and their Applications and Effects in Everyday Life. These AI governance norms have been released by the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, and these include the principles for AI governance and the action plan that we can take up. The principles you can quote directly in your answer for the AI governance, and the points under the action plan which has been suggested by the ministry, you can use it as the suggestions for the AI governance answer. The first principle regarding the AI governance is the trust. That trust should be the basis, trust should be the foundation for AI governance. Unless there is trust, then the innovation will not be there. If there is no trust, then the adoption of the AI will not happen. Also, the ministry recommends that we should have a people first approach. There should be a human centric approach in the governance of AI. The human being should have the ultimate control, the control over their data. For example, human being should have the oversight over the AI. Human beings should be empowered through the adoption of AI rather than the other way around. And the focus should be upon the innovation, not upon the restraint. We should not create hurdles, we should not create governance hurdles, governance restraints, rather promote the innovation so that the responsible innovation is prioritized over the cautionary restraint. Also, there should be an emphasis upon the fairness and equity. AI should be used fairly for promoting inclusive development, to reduce inequality, to avoid discrimination, both economic, social, as well as political. Additionally, there should be accountability. Accountability should be embedded into the AI governance framework so that there is clear allocation of responsibility. There are clear governance structures which are created, the responsibilities are clearly delineated, and the enforcement of regulations therefore is transparent. Also, the AI governance should be understandable by design. It should be open and transparent. There should be disclosures and explanations that can be understood by both the users as well as the regulators. Additionally, there should be focus upon the safety and sustainability as well, because safe, secure and robust systems will be able to withstand any shocks, and they will be environmentally sustainable as well. Additionally, there is the action plan which has been suggested by the ministry as part of the AI governance norms. The action plan is divided across three headers: the short term action plan, medium term and the long term action. In the short term, the focus should be on the establishment of the key governance institutions. For example, there should be an expert working group, there should be an AI governance committee which should be established, and the risk frameworks, they should be developed India specific based upon the contingencies that can be predicted in India, and there should be voluntary commitments as well. Additionally, the committee recommends that we can go for legal amendments also to ensure that the innovation is encouraged, but at the same time there should be clear regulatory processes as well. Also, there can be clear liability regimes put in place so that the usage of AI is not promoting inequality or promoting discrimination. Additionally, the access to infrastructure can be promoted. For example, the development of the sandboxes, the launching of awareness programs should be there, and the increased access to the AI safety tools can be promoted. In the medium term, we can recommend that there should be common standards so that eventually there is the achievement of global common standards for the AI regulation also. And we can amend the laws and regulations accordingly, and we can operationalize the AI incident systems, pilot regulatory sandboxes and expand the integration with AI. In the long run, we can continue the ongoing engagements, for example, the capacity building, standard setting, access and adoption, and we need to continuously review and update the governance frameworks as well to ensure that sustainability of the digital ecosystem, and we'll need to draft the new laws based upon the emerging risks and capabilities. The next article is related to the introduction of cheetahs in the Nauradehi Wildlife Sanctuary. This is important in GS3 under the topic Environment Conservation. Before coming to the article, let's discuss a few facts regarding the Nauradehi Wildlife Sanctuary. It was declared a wildlife sanctuary in 1975. It is the largest wildlife sanctuary in the state of Madhya Pradesh, and it is located on a plateau. It is a part of the Upper Vindhyan Ranges, and it serves as a corridor for the Panna Tiger Reserve and the Satpura Tiger Reserve, and it even indirectly connects the Bandhavgarh Tiger Reserve via the Rani Durgavati Wildlife Sanctuary. It falls under the Deccan Peninsula biogeographic region. The vegetation in the Nauradehi Wildlife Sanctuary is tropical dry deciduous forest. The drainage of the wildlife sanctuary is from the two basins. 3/4 is in the Ganga Yamuna basin and 1/4 is from the Narmada basin. The rivers passing through the Nauradehi Wildlife Sanctuary are Kopra, Bamnir, Bierma, which are tributaries of Ken. The flora here comprises of teak, dhaura, bhira, bhel, maua, tendu, gunja and amla. The fauna here comprises of tiger, panther, sloth bear, wild dog, blue bull, chinkara, spotted deer and sambar. Let's also discuss a few facts regarding the Kuno National Park, where the cheetahs were introduced earlier. It is also located in the state of Madhya Pradesh near the Vindhyan Hills, and through this the Kuno river passes, from which the Kuno National Park name is also derived, which is in turn a tributary of the Chambal, and it was included under the action plan for introduction of cheetahs in India. The vegetation here also comprises of the same tropical dry deciduous forest, and the flora here comprises of more than 129 species of trees including kardhai, khair, salai, etc. And the fauna in the Kuno National Park also includes cheetahs, jungle cat, Indian leopard, sloth bear, Indian wolf, striped hyena, golden jackal, Bengal fox, dhole, and also more than 120 bird species as well. Now coming to the article, the Madhya Pradesh government is preparing the state's largest wildlife sanctuary in Nauradehi as the third home of cheetahs, the fastest big cats on the planet. They will first time be competing with an apex predator because 25 tigers are also there. They have made Nauradehi their home, and an estimated 100 crocodiles, Indian wolves, wild dogs and panthers also live in the Nauradehi Wildlife Sanctuary. In the Nauradehi Wildlife Sanctuary, the prey base is good. The grassland quality is also excellent, which is an indication of the sanctuary's potential. The tigers were introduced here in 2018 from just 2 individuals. Now there are more than 25 tigers, including cubs, which shows that the habitat can support the apex predators. Now the prey base is also diverse, as the 2020 census recorded that there are more than 4,700 nilgai along with close to 1800 cheetal as well as more than 1500 chinkara, which serve as the praise for the cheetahs and tigers. The next article is related to the Conference of Parties 30, which is being held in Brazil. This is important in GS3 under the topic Environment, Climate Change. Before coming to the article, let's discuss briefly a few facts regarding the developments in the notable Conference of Parties till now. In 1995, the COP1 took place in Berlin, Germany, whereby the parties began negotiations on the quantitative objectives and deadlines to reduce the GHGs, the greenhouse gas emissions. In 1997, COP3, which was held in Kyoto, Japan, the first legally binding treaty was put in place which required the industrialized countries to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, but it was largely ineffective because US and China did not follow the guidelines of the treaty. In 2015, the famous COP21 held in Paris, which led to the Paris Agreement, the most comprehensive climate agreement to date, was signed. Its goal was to limit the global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial benchmark temperatures. In 2022, in COP27, the Loss and Damage Fund for the vulnerable countries is established. In 2023, in COP28 in Dubai, the call for reduction and transition away from the fossil fuels as an energy source was stated in the official COP text for the first time. In COP29 in 2024 in Baku, Azerbaijan, the parties agreed to deliver at least $300 billion per year by 2035 to the poorer countries to help them fight climate change. Now coming to the article, it has been written by the Brazilian president, and he mentions the steps taken till now and with a particular focus upon the Brazilian steps. The UN climate conventions have been held regularly. The international agreements and the nationally determined contributions have been announced by various countries. The global action to protect the ozone layer has been taken up, and Brazil has halved the Amazon deforestation in 2 years. Brazil has put in place ambitious new nationally determined contributions, that is reducing the emissions from 59 to 67%. Brazil has brought in a clean energy matrix by targeting for 88% renewable electricity, and there has been a launch of Tropical Forest Forever facility as well. But there are steps which need to be taken further. For example, we need to move beyond speeches and we need to take up real and urgent action to tackle climate change. We also need to fulfill the principle of CBDR, common but differentiated responsibilities, because of the obligations of the industrialized and developed countries for them to give technology as well as finance to the developing countries. The rich countries must honor their climate finance debts, and there should be ambitious nationally determined contributions as well as their implementation. There has to be a climate finance also to ensure a just and equitable energy transition globally. Also, we need to redirect the oil revenues to fund the energy transition. The inequality also has to be fought, and it has to be at the center of climate action. The climate action is to be linked with the fight against hunger and poverty as well, and we can also put in place a new United Nations Climate Change Council for ensuring accountability as well as a broader reform in the global governance architecture as well. The next article is related to the contempt of court. Before coming to the article, let's discuss briefly the provisions of the Contempt of Court Act 1971. Because the Contempt of Court is not defined under the Indian Constitution, it has been defined under the Contempt of Court Act 1971. Section 2A of the Act provides that the contempt of court can be of two kinds, civil contempt and criminal contempt. Section 2B provides that the civil contempt will be done if there is a willful disobedience of an order passed by the court, a decree issued by the court, a direction of the court, or any judgment of the court, or any writ, or if there is a breach of an undertaking given to the court, that also amounts to civil contempt of the court. Whereas Section 2C provides for the criminal contempt of the court, that if there is publication of any matter or performance of any act which scandalizes the court or lowers the authority of any court, or it interferes in any type of judicial proceedings, or it obstructs or interferes with the administration of justice in any manner, then that act or that publication will amount to criminal contempt of the court. Section 12 provides that if there is a contempt of the court, then there can be a punishment of up to 6 months also. Now, coming to the article, there has been a recent controversy regarding the allegedly contemptuous and derogatory remarks against the Chief Justice of India and the Supreme Court of India. It has been alleged that these acts amount to diminishing the authority of the Apex Court of India, and they are seen to be acts of interference and obstructing the administration of justice. Therefore, we need to understand the phrase contempt of court. It has not been defined in the Constitution of India, but it has been mentioned there under Article 19 Clause 2. That contempt of court is a ground for reasonable restriction of the freedom of speech and expression, which is provided under Article 19 Clause 1 Clause A. The Supreme Court and the High Courts in India, they are the courts of record. Supreme Court, a court of record under Article 129, and the High Court under the Article 215. Therefore, they have the power to punish for their contempt also, as they are serving as the courts whose decisions are kept for perpetuity as guidance. Now, the contempt is different from mere disrespect. It is beyond just covering disobedience and disruption in the working of the justice system, and the courts can also take up proceedings suo moto also. The contempt proceedings can also be initiated by a third party, provided that the petition has the consent from the Attorney General in case it is a case of contempt of the Supreme Court, and the Advocate General in case it is a contempt of the High Court of a state. Now, it is a settled principle that fair criticism of a decided case is not contempt, but if the criticism is transgressing the limits of fair commentary, then that can be held as contemptuous. It has been held in the Ashwini Kumar Ghosh versus Arbinda Bose case in 1952. In Anil Ratan Sarkar versus Hirak Ghosh case, it was held that the power to punish for contempt must be exercised with caution. It should only be exercised only when there is a clear violation of an order. Also, in Jayarajan versus High Court of Kerala case, the Supreme Court held that a contempt finding against an individual for using abusive language in a public speech while criticizing a High Court order, establishing that such actions could be considered criminal contempt for undermining the judiciary's authority and disrupting the administration of justice. Recently, in Shanmugam versus the High Court of Madras case, it was held that the very purpose to punish for contempt is to ensure the administration of justice. Thank you.